I've been asked to speak about Christians and golf, which I'll begin with, but I've expanded the talk to include Christians and sport, as my driving experience has expanded beyond golf over the years. As a bit of background, I started driving golfers at professional golf events in 1999, and I've driven at more than 50 tournaments over the past 20 years. And I'll share some of my experiences, conversations, and lessons that I've learned from these opportunities. It was only after my good friend Lenny Shaw moved to Swindon in pursuit of his career that I decided it would be prudent to find alternative employment, as my career in IT at that time appeared to be coming to an end, although it's since been the contract's been extended and it still continues today. But I started my own company in 2016, linking my website to the Church of God website, sharing my faith and prompting a number of inquiries backwards and forwards. I passed the Institute of Advanced Motorist test in 2006, and I took a 3-week security course in Birmingham in 2017. The following year, I decided I needed to be fit for the image of a driver. And although it doesn't look like it, I actually joined a gym in Stirling. So let me share with you some slides that will assist us in our talk. So there we have Christians and sport, although the initial brief was for Christians and golf. And there's the gym in Stirling. You've got training for service in Flaxlands. Well, this is fit for service for me, trying to prompt the right questions at the same time as being fit for faithful service, because they've got these statements right across the walls to give you a bit of encouragement when you're at the gym. I also saw it the same as being fit for faithful service and giving you encouragement through these words at the same time. Top right is commitment, which speaks for itself. It's regular involvement, isn't it, in church activities. Bottom left, taking on board the right spiritual food through prayer and reading and study of God's word, and getting into the right regular routine, prioritizing your time and commitments in the right order of priority. It's a marathon, isn't it? It's not a sprint. And can you see the results of all your efforts that you've put in? Bottom right, if you change nothing, nothing will change. It's all about making the right choices, isn't it? And keeping company with the right people. So here's a list of Christian golfers that I've come across on the PGA Tour in America. I found very few, if any at all, on the European Tour. All of the Christians that I've come across have been on the US Tour, although they come across and play in the UK, where I've met them all. One that I've interacted most with, I'd say, is Bernard Langer. He's been on the tour for more than 30, 40 years now on the senior tour. And I asked him, what was the verse that initially got you into faith, that brought you to faith? And he immediately says John 3 and verse 3. That was the verse that brought him and realized he needed to make a change in his life. No one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again. You must be born again, born of the flesh and born of the spirit. And you can see in his faithful life that he realized at that point he had to make a change and do something. And so he put his faith in Jesus Christ, being born again, not just physically, but spiritually as well. There's Justin Leonard, a major champion as well. And I drove him and his wife. They'd just been married the year before, and a Christian couple. And their favourite verses were in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the chapter of love. And that was what was read at their Christian marriage service together just a few months before. Jordan Spieth, again, a very faithful man on the US Tour. and he told me about his faith comes first. He's got his priorities certainly in the right order. He says faith comes first, then comes the family, and then everything else comes after that. And he lives a very humble life. And it certainly reflects in his favourite verse. He says his favourite verse is in James 4 and verse 10. Humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. And these men have certainly been exalted through their golf, but also both on and off the golf course as well. This is Stuart Sink, and this is what you talk about, faith in action. Just a few months ago, he won one of the biggest tournaments on the PGA Tour, RBC Heritage Tournament, and at Hilton Head. And here he is speaking during a national broadcast that went out right across America.
The thing about me and my family with the peace and joy we experience, it's not something that just we wait for the circumstances to line up like the planets or some, signs or tea leaves or something. We install our own peace and joy because of our faith in Jesus Christ.
It very much reminds me of Romans 1 and verse 16. I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes. Also, remember Brian Fullerton talking about his faith when he was working, and he was at an office gathering, and he stood on the platform in front of all his work colleagues, and he was able to profess his faith and share his faith with all his work colleagues. So not being ashamed of the gospel and making the most of every opportunity. Let me also share an experience. In 2014, at the Open Championship at Royal Liverpool, it's one of the most difficult venues for logistics. One of the best is Royal Troon, but one of the worst is one of the most difficult is Royal Liverpool, as well as Royal St George's, just because it's very small venues and it's difficult to manoeuvre your way around. The road systems are tricky and the airports are quite far away, Liverpool and Manchester as well. And Stuart Sink was on the charter flight that came in from the US tournament. It finishes on the Sunday. They get on the flight, it flies overnight, and they come in to the venue in the UK on the Monday morning. We had about 100 golfers and their families as they flew into Manchester, and then 3 buses brought them to a car park in Hoylake at Royal Liverpool. They arrived earlier than expected, and in fact, we only had 5 cars. And when I got there, just at the same time as these 3 buses were arriving with 100 tired guests looking to get transport to their accommodation, I remember saying a quick prayer, confronted with 100 guests and only 5 cars. I remember feeling an immediate calmness and a peace, just because I'd given it over to God and to help me to get through this situation. And I could see Stuart Sink. He was waiting patiently in the background with all the other families. However, there were 3 golfers who were a bit more animated. One was very animated to my right-hand side, throwing his arms in the air and wanting to know where his car was and needs to get to his accommodation. And one on my left-hand side, and all he was doing into my ear was constantly saying over and over and over again his surname. I think the idea was that by saying his surname into my ear, then obviously I'd remember his name. When a car became available, he would be the first one, to get the transport. However, the biggest disappointment was what was happening right in front of me. One of the most high-profile Christians on the PGA Tour was standing inches from my face, giving me a very hard time for something that was pretty much out with my control. He's a 2-time major champion, and he's wearing sunglasses, so I couldn't even see his eyes. And he come with Stuart Sink. Christians tend to travel together, and so they were all together. Stuart Sink was in the background, and this other golfer was giving me a bit of a hard time looking for transport. Yes, you can get angry, but not because of what is happening to you. You get angry for what is happening to other people, to those less fortunate than yourself, to those who don't have a voice to stand up for themselves. Jesus got angry, not over what was happening to him, but what was happening to others. In the temple, remember, people were being swindled by the money changers as they were transferring their money and making big profits off of the poor. Those who came with their sacrifices, selling animals, who were lame and poor and blind and weren't fit, for sacrifice for God, who only wants the very best that we can have to offer, and they were giving something that wasn't up to God's standard. So what happened when Jesus was nailed to the cross at Calvary? Did he get angry about what was happening to him? No. What did he say? He says, Father, forgive them. In fact, Jesus says, if an evil person takes your shirt, then give them your coat as well. If you get struck on the cheek, turn your face and let them strike your other cheek. And if you're asked to go 1 mile, it was the law in those times that the Roman soldiers could ask a Jew to take their armory or their weaponry and carry it with them for 1 mile. But Jesus says, if you're asked to go 1 mile, you go 2 miles. Another observation from 2014, I was driving the #1 sportsman in the world, and I asked him to put on his seatbelt. The practice range is 1 mile away from the golf course, and we're out on the open road. And I treat everyone exactly the same. It doesn't matter if you're the #1 sportsman or if you're a school child being driven to school. You all get treated with the same respect and consideration. And Jesus treats us as equals. He wants the very best for each and every one of us. And so we treat others with the same level of respect and consideration. So let's go back to our slides. We're talking about school children there. That's one of the contracts that I've got, is taking school children with special needs to school. I've got 5 children that I take as a way of giving back. Then I go and speak at their classes, just about business studies, what their careers will be perhaps once they leave school. Autism, it certainly brought it quite to my attention. 1 in 6 adults in the workforce has autism. Do you think the person that you're talking to perhaps just doesn't like you because they're not looking at you? Or is it because they're perhaps on the spectrum of having a level of autism? What about the child that's screaming as they're going through the shopping centre, and you think there's bad parents there? Or is it because the child is autism, and they can't help the behaviour in public places? Of the 5 children that I drive, 1 is named after an Israeli king, and 3 others are named after 3 of Jesus' disciples. Names can be a witness. Isaiah's son was called Shear Jashub, a remnant shall return. So every time Isaiah went out, he was always advertising to the kings and the people that he met that God would always have a remnant that would return, always through Judah, through the line of David, through Joseph to Jesus, always having his chosen people, a remnant that he would always keep for himself. As I said, I did a security course as well. And one of the phrases that struck me from that was, it says, do the right thing, do the wrong thing, but don't do nothing. It reminded me of the climate campaigner, Robert Swan, who says the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. It's very much on our radar, isn't it, about climate change? And it also made me think, it's the same with us telling others about Jesus. The biggest threat is that we believe that someone else will tell others about Jesus. It's not just up to evangelists, like Brian Johnston or David Woods or Carol Smith, to tell others about Jesus. It's a responsibility for all of us. There's 12 new churches being planted in 2021 because of the work of the evangelists, because of those who have given their time and their life to tell others about Jesus. And so it's also our responsibility as Christians. The very last words that Jesus spoke as he ascended into heaven, you shall be my witnesses. So it's a responsibility for each and every one of us. This is a slide of some of the guests that I've driven over the years. I started in 2016, top left, with a couple. They were on their honeymoon and they met at their Baptist church in California. And that was just a few weeks before they got married at church. That's where they met. And then 2016, they decided to come to Scotland and go to the Highlands for a tour. That was the very first tour that I did, taking Christian couple into the Highlands. Then across to the top middle, they're a Catholic couple who are NBC camera and sound team at the 2018 Winter Olympics. One point they emphasised was the unity of one Catholic church against the dozens of denominations that we see in our churches today, which is certainly a very interesting thought. Top right, boohoo.com. I drove the owner of the company, David Woods. He lives down in your neck of the woods. You know you've made it when you've got two gates to get into your house. But the most kindest, most humble, most down-to-earth man I don't think I have ever met. He was always asking after me, can I get you something? When we got to his house, he says, do you want to come in and use the bathroom? Because can I give you some drinks? One of the richest men, but one of the most humble. And one of the guests that was in the car, the conversation struck me. The guest said to him, he says, you don't gamble and you don't drink. You're not much fun. Yes, the man's a Muslim, but what a public stand of his Muslim faith, that through his lifestyle, others could see he didn't gamble and he didn't drink, and he was making a stand for his own faith through his lifestyle. Down from that is a family from Philadelphia. That's the North Coast 500. It's the 500 miles from Inverness. You can go clockwise and anti-clockwise. That's the mountains of Torridon. And they go to their evangelical church every week, and so we had nice conversations with the family on the North Coast 500 trip. Bottom right, they're a couple from Colorado, and this was an Outlander tour, and they go to Andrew Womack's church. You maybe see on the God channel. He's one of the regular contributors, Andrew Womack, and they go to his church in Colorado. Bottom middle, you might not recognise him, but that's Dave Philp, and you know Sandra Doricott. Well, that's Sandra's brother. And I played with Dave about 20 years ago on the old course at St Andrews. The only time I've played it, only time Dave's played it, they were across with their family, and they enjoyed the old course. And that was us in 2018, watching some golf. We got them tickets for the Open Championship at Carnoustie. Enjoying a day's golf in the sunshine. And then bottom left was one of England's international football strikers. I had him in the car, taking him back to Edinburgh Airport. He sat in the back along with his friend and his brother. But I was chatting to his close protection officer, who was sitting beside me in the front seat. And believe it or not, he was from Port Glasgow. So I said to him, I says, do you know about the Haven Christian Rehab Centre? Oh, yes, he said. He says, everyone in Port Glasgow knows about the rehab centre for drug addicts, the church also on Ormsey Avenue. And I thought, wow, I says, what a witness to think that people know instantly about a rehab centre and a church because of their work that they do in the community and the wider community at large. It reminded me of Phil Brennan, well known in Buxton because of his work in the local community, and people relate Phil in the church in the local community. It made me think, has your church made an impact on your local community? Is your church instantly recognisable and well known for the work that you do locally and perhaps wider at large? This is the 2018 Winter Olympics. Billy Graham in the 1970s spoke to his biggest audience of 1 million people at one rally in Seoul in South Korea. And I don't know if it's a result of that or work from other evangelists, but I've never seen so many churches. And at night time, all of the crosses are all lit up on top of the churches. And it's quite a sight to see dozens and dozens of crosses right across the night sky. What a witness it was. And they made the opportunity to come out and actually share their faith at the same time. Now, this is one of the witnesses that were taking place and handing out tracts and singing hymns. I wonder if you recognise this hymn. It's in our PHSS.
You know that, right?
Certainly a South Korean version of the hymn, but as I survey the wondrous cross on which the Lord of Glory died, part of their witness to visitors in 2018. This is the Olympic golf course just north of Tokyo last year. Beautiful golf course, beautifully manicured, tough 18th green there to finish on. And that's where the gold, the silver and bronze medals were decided for the men's and women's tournament. The striking thing about Tokyo was that I didn't see any churches. I think I saw one Baptist church the whole time I was in Tokyo. Again, Billy Graham spoke there to the Japanese in the 70s. Evangelists have gone out there, but they very much, I think, the Japanese see Christianity as a Western religion. I suppose much in the same way that we look at Buddha and Muhammad as Asian and Middle East religions. This struck me as well. This is the Shibuya crossing, the busiest crossing in the world in downtown Tokyo. And up to 3,000 people cross over at any one time. Instantly reminds me of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, when King Solomon looked over his life. And what did he say? He says, meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. His gold, his wealth, his palaces meant nothing. What do people gain from their labours? Here's these people going about their everyday life, and the sun rises and the sun sets. They do the same thing day in and day out. The wind blows to the south and then it blows from the north. Only what God gave Solomon in his life gave him any satisfaction. We've recently been reading about the C.T. Studd poem posted by Philip Hawthorne and has been viewed many times over the past few days. And it puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? That the brevity of life, only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And that's exactly what King Solomon saw in Ecclesiastes 1. It was only what God gave him in his life that brought him any satisfaction. Are these the Blue Mountains of Australia? Is it Colorado or is it the Grand Canyon? No, it's the mountains of Torridon in the Highlands of Scotland. And this is where my mother's side of the family come from, the MacDonalds. They were poor. That was the croft that my great-grandfather built in the early 1900s, still stands today. One room. They had no electricity or running water. They were poor, but they were rich. They were rich in faith and rich in the values that they passed on to future generations. And I'm quite sure that the past 2 years have made us all realise just how much we have and how little we actually need. Perhaps we need to factory reset, get back to basics again, when life has become too much, too complicated and too stressful. Just like you've got your laptop or your computer, you have to hit the factory reset button and start over again and get back to basics. Perhaps that's what we have to do in 2022, realise how much we actually have and how little we actually need. Instantly recognisable as the home of golf. It's St Andrews. It's a mecca for golfers from all over the world. And of course, as Christians, Christian pilgrims, we're just passing through this land. And so our Christian home is far grander, more permanent, and more satisfying than anything that we see on earth. The lovely three bridges over the River Forth, and this is where the cruise ships come in. And this is where I was privileged to have my two favourite passengers of all time. September 2018, we had the pleasure of having Laurie and Brenda Williams visit just for the day. They were doing a cruise around the UK, going into various ports like Liverpool and Greenock. And this was the day they stopped in at Edinburgh. And what a day we had. They sat and we just chatted the whole day in the car about our past experiences, our memories of teen camp, their wonderful hospitality and their kindness. And we just had such a great time together. And you can thank Laurie Williams for all of these YFR events and conventions, because it was Laurie that asked the initial question at Mount Forest Camp in 1987. He says, "What would you like to see for young people?" And the answer came back, a larger style teen camp with young people from all over the world. And the seed was sown. Keith and Laurie were the two spiritual leaders. You look to them as older, mature men. They were only in their 40s at the time, but they're so far ahead of their time and so mature spiritually. And Keith suggested, that the fellowship would be 100 years old in 1992. And so the plans were put in place. Thanks to that question that Laurie asked in 1987, what would you like to see for young people? And who could forget that gathering that we had at Kinmore Hall? Great men, and taking so much from them. I think Keith is perhaps one of the greatest preachers, in my opinion, that I'd ever heard. I always got something when Keith spoke. And Laurie was just an expert at everything, a jack of all trades and a master of every single one of them. And that's what you do. You take aspects of people's lives, and that is what makes you the person that you become. You become what these people are to you and what they mean to you. And I took so much from Keith and from Laurie. And also, like Cam Ramage, a whole room would light up, whenever Cam entered into a room. And he was such great company and such happy memories. Again, Fred Marks, who we lost recently, enjoyed many a great conversation over various games of golf with Fred. So I'm so grateful to have had all of them as part of my life growing up and learning from every single one of them. And that becomes a part of me, is what was reflected in their spiritual and faithful lives. So that's it. What have I learned then? It's been fit for service. It's do not be ashamed of the gospel. You shall be my witnesses. Only what gives us in our life, what God gives us in our life, will bring us any lasting satisfaction. And don't leave it to others to share the news about Jesus Christ and to make the most of every opportunity that comes our way in 2022. So thank you for listening, and may God bless you all. Thank you.